Welcome to the Wildlife Podcast with me, Laurel Nimi, and my amazing colleague, Jeffrey Barbie. Together, we're exploring our amazing world, highlighting some of the most accomplished conservationists, scientists, and protectors of our wild places. Today, we're speaking to David Derrick, an attorney in the Oceans Program at the Center for Biological Diversity. David has done a lot of work to protect marine life and ecosystems, and that's what we're going to talk about today, with a focus on deep sea mining. So welcome, and let's get right into it. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about the Center for Biological Diversity where you're working.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So the Center for Biological Diversity is a national environmental nonprofit focused on preventing extinction and protecting biodiversity. We're really focused on saving all life on Earth. So whereas some nonprofits may be focused on whales or wolves, we care about every critter, big and small. We primarily work by litigation, suing the federal government or state agencies when they're doing things to threaten species. Our bread and butter is the Endangered Species Act and putting science forward, doing what science demands to save life on Earth.
And I'm curious about how you personally got interested in the environment and especially protecting oceans.
That has been a slow process over time. When I moved to California, my hobbies began to switch to the outdoors. I started hiking and backpacking and diving. And as my hobbies started to center on the outdoors, my reading did, and I became more informed of the threats the environment faced. And I made a career pivot and started working to protect the environment and really lucked into the position I have now. I'm so fortunate to get to work on protecting our majestic oceans.
And most of us see the ocean from the top, and it's like a huge blue expanse, or gray or green, depending where we are. And I'm hoping that you can give us a little bit more of a sense of oceans and their sort of the whole ecosystem and what's in them, and bring us a little bit below the surface here.
I can try, but man, the oceans are big and complicated.
You know, occasionally you might go whale watching and see some whales as they breach or something, but it's really mysterious to know what's underneath this surface.
It really is, and there's a lot down there. It's a very layered ecosystem. What lives close to the surface is very different than what lives far away. Sunlight only penetrates the top 200 meters or so, enough for photosynthesis. So you get a lot of life up near the surface. The base of that food web is phytoplankton, plankton being anything that can't swim, anything that floats along. So phytoplankton are kind of the plants that fit into that category, and different critters eat those phytoplankton. Also, up in that photic zone where the light is, you get kelp forests that grow from the seafloor, giant kelp beds with sea otters and sea stars, rockfish and sea lions. In warmer waters, you might find coral reefs with fish and clams, sharks, rays would live there. And then as the bottom starts to get deeper, you find pelagic species that just live in the open water column, sharks and tuna and sunfish. And then the bottom gets deeper and deeper, and you get species that live in the deep, in the dark.
And some of the species I understand, like, say, sperm whales, they sort of transverse all these different layers, right? From the pelagic to the very, very deep ocean. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those other creatures like them?
Yeah, I'm not trying to be extensive here. Again, the ocean has so many unique species that, migrate from the Arctic to the equator or have the ability to travel through the water column thousands of feet in depth. So different marine mammals might breathe air and then still spend a lot of their lives hundreds or thousands of feet deep hunting and swimming. So it's a very complicated and interconnected system, the oceans.
Fascinating. I've had the opportunity before to sail across the ocean, up from South Africa over to St. Helena Island and then up over to the Bulge of Africa. It was a really harrowing experience, but also a valuable, fascinating trip.
I bet. I'm jealous you get to sail on the surface instead of dealing with the oceans through Microsoft Word and court filings. But
Well, let's hope that you get to do both.
I like that.
I think for a lot of listeners, it's such an alien environment. And when you were describing the phytoplankton and plankton, in some ways it's reminding me of insects on land, just sort of these very diverse base of a lot of life. And then as you were describing the water column and the depths, it was reminding me of the different areas within a rainforest and the canopy getting more light versus down below and the different animals that live in these different regions, essentially.
I think that's very accurate. The planktonic community, plankton, is so rich and diverse. We kind of lump them all into one category because they're so small, and we kind of have a bias toward things we can see. But phytoplankton are so diverse and made up of such a rich collection of species. If you zoom in and look under a microscope, it's incredibly diverse in every cup of seawater. And I think your analogy to a rainforest is right. The canopy versus the forest floor is just like what we see in the ocean, except that stratification happens not over hundreds of feet, but thousands.
And the other interesting thing as you were talking that got me thinking is for land mammals, migration, it's not as extensive maybe as, and I might be completely wrong on this, but it's harder to walk maybe than swim thousands of miles. Of course, we have birds that fly thousands of miles and migrate, but in the ocean, that's more of a regular sort of occurrence. Am I right?
I think you're right. I wouldn't be able to quantitatively compare terrestrial to marine species on this front. I wouldn't be equipped, but there are so many marine species that do travel thousands and thousands of miles. Whales come to mind who feed in one place and nurture their young in a place thousands of miles away. Sea turtles hatched in Indonesia will swim all the way across the Pacific to feed on jellyfish off the coast of California. So there are so many species with such rich life histories that involve traveling thousands and thousands of miles, and it's hard to study them. We're still figuring out new ways to track and learn about so much marine life, but there's a lot we still don't know.
Which is pretty interesting because you might know about one part of an animal's life, but then maybe not a whole other part that's really important.
Totally. I mean, for a long time, people thought geese disappeared in the winter. Nature is just really complicated and hard to study. And yeah, we don't even know what we don't know.
Which also means that impacting one part of an ocean might actually end up impacting a lot of species that maybe you don't always see there, or that it's even more interconnected than we think.
I think that's definitely true.
But then it should be no problem. We should just be able to mine the whole seafloor since it's way down there, and
Doesn't
we
matter.
don't really care. It doesn't matter, right?
I don't see any downsides. Yeah.
How deep does the ocean go? Like, how deep are we talking about here?
My gosh, the Mariana Trench is the deepest part of the ocean. I'm not actually sure its depth. Can I Google it real quick and then read you that answer?
I'm just curious because I'm curious how it compares to, a skyscraper or where planes fly or where the atmosphere, I just sort of get a sense of scale.
Well, I would just point out that the average depth of the ocean, so this is from the deepest parts, right, to the shallowest parts. So this is the global average, is about 2.3 miles deep.
That's the average.
That is the average. So for all of our people outside of imperial measurements, that's about 3,500 meters deep. So that is the average. Shit, we lost him. Maybe he'll come back. I think it's pretty crazy that the average depth of the ocean would be so deep. I mean, my mind is blown a bit because I always think of the ocean largely shallow, and then you'd have deep places, just like David was saying, where the Marianas Trench is, just off the Mariana Islands, sort of between there and the coast of Japan. And I think that the fact that it is 3,200 meters deep on average means that the ocean is a vaster place than I had thought, even after having sailed across it.
It is mind-blowing.
Earth is an ocean world, right? And the land mass of Earth is far less than the actual coverage of our oceans. So the health of our oceans and the happiness of our oceans should matter to everybody.
And when thinking about that depth, you're adding a whole dimension there. The biosphere, the part of the earth that things live in on land, is from, however high birds fly to however deep bacteria live in soil. But you're not talking miles in any given place. Whereas in the ocean, you are. When you're talking about a depth of miles, it's not just that the seafloor is miles away, it's that living creatures are spread out vertically over miles. So it's just a massive amount of life we have in the ocean as well.
It's so mind-boggling. It really is. And I'm curious about the range of threats to the ocean. I know you work on a lot of different ones, and without us getting too depressed about it, what are sort of some of the range of threats to oceans?
I was going to say this might not be the most cheery part of the episode, but there are sadly a lot of threats to the oceans. Climate change being a big one. The oceans are heating up. About 90% of the excess heat in the Earth system due to climate change has been absorbed in the ocean, which makes sense when you think about it. It's dark and it takes up a large part of the Earth. And so when sunlight hits the ocean, that's where it gets trapped. Ocean acidification is also caused by our release of fossil fuels. About 30% of the excess CO2 in the Earth system, in the atmosphere, has been absorbed by the oceans. And that's harmful to all species that form calcium carbonate shells, corals, clams, mussels. All of those species have a harder time forming their shells because the oceans are acidifying. Oil and gas development in general is a threat to the ocean as we continue to look for new oil and gas deposits in deeper and deeper waters. That increases the risk of oil spills, which are devastating to a range of species. Our fishing practices currently are pretty harmful. Industrial overfishing involves pulling massive nets full of fish out of the ocean in a really unsustainable way. Maybe there's a lobster pot on the ocean floor, but there's a vertical line running up to the surface, and that vertical line will entangle whales and turtles who might end up drowning. Finally, plastic pollution and shipping are further threats to our ocean. Plastic pollution is increasing at an exponential rate, and shipping causes impacts to species through vessel strikes, through noise pollution, and all of these combine to to be a massive threat to life in the ocean.
She's very eloquent. So I'm curious about deep sea mining and where that fits in to all of these threats.
Deep sea mining is a bit of an all of the above and also a too soon to tell situation. I say it's all of the above because it's increasing noise and ship strikes, and it's causing pollution, and it'll interfere with the ocean's ability to sequester carbon, and it involves habitat removal and all of the same types of threats that the ocean is already facing. And then still it's too soon to tell because there's so much we don't know about the deep ocean in particular and deep sea mining that we don't know the magnitude of the effect of removing habitat. We don't know how far sediment plumes will go and how destructive they will be. So we know it's harmful. The full extent of that harm, we're not yet sure.
I think it's very interesting, having read a lot of the news about the discovery of these dark oxygen producing nodules at the base of the seafloor that are the target for many of these deep sea miners. Just tell our listeners a little bit about that, because it could also be harmful for all life on Earth. Can you break that down a little for us, David?
So most oxygen in our atmosphere comes from either plants or from the phytoplankton that we talked about. But there's a very recent scientific discovery that some oxygen is formed in this deep ocean, that these polymetallic nodules, these these metal balls that precipitate out due to the still water under high pressure and form on the ocean floor, that just the seawater interacting with these metallic nodules under high pressure is creating oxygen. And so it's really a brand new discovery that this process could be providing oxygen to the deep ocean and therefore oxygen to the whole ocean.
That's amazing.
And it is these nodules, I
Surprising.
understand, that they're actually after when they're looking at deep sea mining in some cases. Is that correct?
Yes, there's really three forms of deep sea mining. And the one I hear most about nowadays is polymetallic nodule mining. So that's going after these nodules that are sitting in sediment on the seafloor, vacuuming up the whole seafloor, collecting all of that in a ship on the surface, separating the sediment from the nodule, and then discharging the sediment back into the ocean. There are two other kinds of deep sea mining that involve cutting and scraping of a more compact seabed, and that is a massive sulfide mining or a cobalt-rich crust mining. The former going after hydrothermal vents, and the latter going after mostly seamounts.
Both of which, hydrothermal vents and seamounts, are huge repositories of biodiversity in the deep ocean. Is that true?
They are. They're both really cool ecosystems. So hydrothermal vents and cold seeps are places on the ocean floor that are near what you could think of as like a volcano, a connection to deeper in the earth. And if it's a hydrothermal vent, we're talking about hot water coming out of it. And if it's a cold seep, we're talking about cold water coming out of it. But in either case, it's chemicals from deeper in the earth that are coming up and creating a really unique opportunity for life.
No, this is totally fascinating. I had no idea and I don't
Right.
know all the particulars of it. So the fact that there are these different types aiming at different aspects and also different ecosystems within the ocean, which presumably mean they'll have different impacts as well as
Totally.
different technological ways of getting it and results. And it's just almost too, feels too big to get your head around.
Yes, the different ecosystems that exist on the ocean floor are so unique, and because they produce metals that people want, they're targeted in different ways, but they are really, really cool ecosystems that it would be very sad to lose.
Yeah, they believe that it's possible, they, being many scientists, have published on the fact that these ecosystems may well have been places where life on Earth was actually sort of incubated and started. And as recently as last March, we know that, a study into the long-term impact of deep-sea mining has caused like 40 years of recurring damage. So this is a decadal study that looked at 44 years ago. And these deep-sea mining impacts have been felt for 44 years after single dredging of these polymetallic nodules at the seafloor. So these activities can have long-term impacts, and we know that now. What are you guys doing about this? It sounds like a crisis, but I believe there's some hope.
Actually,
It is.
sorry, before we go into what we're doing, I want to go back to those three types of deep sea mining and talk a little bit about each of the different ecosystems so that we know what
Good
we're
idea,
using
Laurel.
or what we're, so that we know what's being impacted and get an appreciation of each of those. So we talked a little bit about the polymetallic nodule, but can we go back to that and what's sort of there and what's at the, in the cold seeps and the hydrothermal vents, because they're just things that we don't even think about. We know about volcanoes, and I'm picturing a hydrothermal vent like a underwater volcano. And for the nodule, I have no clue. I'm just thinking of like a bubble under the surface.
Oh, you're not far off. I think of a sandy bottom with metal baseballs on it. Each of those baseballs has an ecosystem because that is the only hard surface to attach to down there. So the nodules are where invertebrates live, sponges, and different species are attached directly onto the nodules themselves. So that's what is threatened by the polymetallic nodule mining, directly threatened. In the massive sulfide mining targeting hydrothermal vents, you're not wrong thinking of an underwater volcano. They look like, dark, hot water shooting out, and it is where maybe the cradle of life, if you want to think of it that way. And they're a really unique collection of species, tube worms and different types of crabs and unique microbiota all living there. And then the cobalt-rich crust mining targeting seamounts is really devastating because seamounts are really big hotspots for all sorts of biodiversity as well. Seamounts are kind of just an underwater mountain, but they direct ocean currents upward and create an upwelling of nutrients. And so around seamounts, you find all sorts of life because you get that primary production, you get that photosynthesis near the surface, and so you attract all sorts of life. So the three types of mining target three types of metal deposits, but they also impact three very different sets of ecosystems and communities.
And for the seamounts, I'm almost picturing um, it being the inverse of mountain ecosystems on land, where the valleys are the sort of very productive areas. And with seamounts, you're saying basically it's pushing the nutrients up.
No, I think that's accurate. In the ocean, you have this problem where the sunlight is the key to photosynthesis, and therefore the most productive part of the ocean is where there is sunlight near the surface. But the more nutrient-rich water is deeper. So when you get ocean currents that push that nutrient-rich water into the sunlight, that's where the magic happens. So yeah, it is kind of backwards from that terrestrial system.
So to understand, so the current takes that nutrient-rich water that's sort of down at the bottom, and it pushes it up the seamount, and then the diversity and the biodiversity has a lot more food to eat because of that nutrient-rich water upwelling around the seamount. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's correct. And fishermen have been targeting seamounts for their fishing for thousands of years because this is well known that these are really, really special places in the ocean, and now they're at risk.
And are there a lot of them?
There are a lot of them. I think any prolific scuba divers listening are familiar with some. They're not ubiquitous, but they exist in many places in the ocean. And I'm not sure how many of them have that cobalt-rich crust, but that cobalt-rich crust is found mostly on seamounts.
Yeah. And I would just note that for our listeners, cobalt is one of these rare earth metals that is highly prized in our sort of transition to an electrified world. So not only are the oceans threatened by, for instance, the mining of oil and gas, but as we transition away from that, they're also threatened by the mining of these rare earth metals that we desperately need globally to advance the electricity revolution.
Totally. And that's what makes deep sea mining fall into kind of the false solution bucket in my mind, because people who are well meaning and thinking we do need to pivot away from dirty fuels and toward solar panels and batteries are right in thinking we do need the metals that are collected from deep sea mining: manganese, nickel, cobalt, gold, and silver. All of those are important in the energy transition, but deep sea mining is just not the right way to go about getting them.
What are the mechanics of deep sea mining? How do you do it, and how destructive is it in each of these different ecosystems?
Great question, Laurel. Yeah.
I'll tell you that it's never been commercially successful. So
Really?
there has been lots of exploration, there has been lots of testing. I have an answer to your question, which I'll get to, but I do want to immediately flag that this isn't some practice that's well established and decades old. We're talking prototypes that people have been testing. This is still an industry trying to get off the ground. There's been no successful commercial exploitations yet, but three different types of mining have different equipment to go after the nodules. Generally, it's a giant vacuum suction that collects the whole seafloor, sediment and all, and separates them later. There is a company who has a claim that they have a robot with arms that can pluck the nodules off the ground instead of using a vacuum. The other two, the sulfide mining and the cobalt-rich crust mining, more are giant machines that cut and scrape. It's more similar to like an open pit mine or mountaintop removal on land, just a really big effort to extract a big chunk of the seabed and separate it later.
So, with each of those three types, what are the resources and minerals they're going after? So, with the cobalt rich mining, I assume cobalt. But are there
That's a good assumption.
I mean, you mentioned you mentioned a whole host of them, and are there just different proportions in each of these?
The polymetallic nodules tend to be a lot of manganese, nickel, cobalt, and copper. Iron is often found with the manganese. In the massive sulfide mining, you'll find gold and silver and zinc. And cobalt is the main target of the cobalt-rich crusts, as you guessed. These metals are found in different quantities. I wouldn't propose hardline separations like that, but that's generally what is targeted.
And what are some of the policies involving deep sea mining? And so, are there rules in place that govern it? And who decides that?
It's a very tricky question to answer. So I'll start by saying in the waters of each country, within their territorial waters, each country has total control. So within a few miles of the coast, that is up to each country to decide. The rest of the ocean, the vast majority, is international waters, and that has a complicated regime governing it. There is a UN treaty called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which set up the International Seabed Authority, the ISA. And the ISA is a governing body whose job is to answer that question. Who gets to mine the deep sea? What are the steps required? How are we going to protect the ocean and explore this idea? Predictably, the United States did not join that part of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and so is not a party to the International Seabed Authority. Instead, in the 80s, the U.S. passed its own statute, which is called DSHMRA, the Deep Sea Hard Mineral Resources Act. And that statute says, until we join the ISA, here's how we're going to govern deep sea mining in international waters. So there's kind of an alternative to the ISA in the United States. And then the other players are companies, corporations. They're not usually the same companies that are mining on land. They're pretty specialized companies because this is a pretty different process, but those are the main players involved in deep sea mining.
For the listeners, I'm sure everybody's wondering, what is the U.S. law? Does it only apply to U.S. companies, or is there some sort of continuous ban on it until it's proven safe, or is it allowed until it's proven unsafe?
So the United States law applies to U.S. companies, but it is very easy to become a U.S. corporation, which is what mining companies are doing now, is incorporating a U.S. subsidiary and claiming to be a U.S. company in order to take advantage of the DSHMRA path as an end run around the ISA UN-sanctioned path. And so the U.S. is not really respecting the ISA's authority here and is signaling that it intends to issue permits to mine in international waters without really the authority to do that. Other countries are passing moratoriums or are putting a precautionary pause on deep sea mining in their own waters or advocating for the ISA to do the same. But the U.S. is currently going full steam ahead.
And so that can happen, that a U.S. company can just mine anywhere with no sanction against it or no problem.
doesn't really make a lot of sense. But yes, the U.S. position is that it has the authority to issue permits to mine in international waters, and it intends to do just that. No permits have issued yet, but we are taking steps in that direction.
And just to remind listeners, as we were talking before, mining in one part of the ocean actually affects more than just that local part of the ocean. So I'm curious what the Center for Biological Diversity is doing related to these pending permits. Are there permits pending? What's the process? And what are you doing to change that or mitigate that?
So there are a lot of balls in the air for deep sea mining right now, because there are two fronts that the administration is moving in. One, domestic waters, and one, international waters. So the first step for leasing in domestic waters, which includes our territorial waters, is to put out a request for information. And so they've done that for the waters surrounding American Samoa, the Northern Mariana Islands, and Alaska, and they're pursuing additional places. But there they say, hey, we want to have a lease sale and start leasing for deep sea mining in these areas. What does everyone think? And so at the center, we have been commenting and providing science, providing argument on what the law requires, and demonstrating that these processes that they're attempting are not compliant with our environmental statutes, that they need to be undertaking environmental analysis and they need to be following the science, and that they're not. And then in international waters, they are following a different process. We're doing the same there. There are currently applications for permits pending, that a company has applied for permits there. By law, they have to post those applications, accept comments, and then do analysis. And so we are commenting on those applications, on their insufficiency and the legal problems with issuing a permit there. And so at this stage, we are currently commenting and providing science and legal argument.
How can people help?
These comment opportunities are not just available to organizations like mine, but anyone can comment. So as the administration continues to jump toward deep sea mining everywhere, to comment and voice your opposition is very helpful. And I actually just think being informed on this issue, like I mentioned, it is a false solution that people who support the energy transition might not know a lot about. I think correcting people when they think deep sea mining has no downsides is useful, because this is an issue that a lot of people don't know about. There are also petitions that people can sign. There are corporations that have taken pledges not to use metals that have been mined with deep sea mining, because it's a really harmful way to mine for metals. So signing petitions like that, or petitions calling for a moratorium on mining, are useful as well.
Excellent. We'll have some of those in the show notes below for everybody who's listening.
Yeah, and I'm curious, so the pledge that corporations are taking, I mean, in some ways it reminds me a little bit of like blood diamonds, or different wildlife-friendly products, or sustainable palm oil. Is there any list of corporations who are making those pledges, or are there any certifications or anything like that?
I don't have a list off the top of my head. I know there are some big tech names. I don't want to say it wrong and give a company credit where it hasn't earned it. But there are a couple big tech names on that list. I'm not exactly sure who. But it is like those campaigns in that we should be sourcing our inputs from the most sustainable source. But at the end of the day, we're going to solve this problem not by getting our inputs from somewhere marginally better, but from reducing how much we need. And that's a big key to preventing this type of harm, is the classic reduce, reuse, recycle, and repair. Americans produce 47 pounds of e-waste per year. And so that type of consumption is what drives the need for these critical minerals higher than it would otherwise be.
So that's a key way of recycling some of these minerals and using the recycled minerals and perhaps new tech to be able to recycle that and reuse them.
Post-consumer waste, that kind of e-waste is a great source of these. Also, tailings, the waste that comes from our current mining practices on land also are a great source of these minerals, but we just don't use them in an efficient way. So going after those two sources of waste before we start industrializing the whole ocean floor is is a better avenue.
Well, I'm curious about what states are doing related to this because it seems that, around Alaska, Alaska would have a say in it, or is it all a federal issue? Or California or all the coastal states?
You are right that in the United States, US states have control over the water within a couple miles of the coast, and that federal jurisdiction only takes place beyond that. All of the proposals that I've mentioned do take place in federal waters, not state. And I'm currently unaware of any state that's taken action on deep sea mining, but it's not that there isn't space for that. We talk about deep sea mining as if it only happens tens of thousands of feet down, but it can happen very near shore and in shallower waters. The Alaska proposal, even though it's 3 miles offshore in federal waters, includes some seagrass beds. So we're talking fairly shallow. So there is an opportunity for states to take action and ban this practice in their state waters, but I don't know of any states that have taken that up yet.
So there's, in terms of listeners who want to get involved, there's a lot of points where they can. One is commenting on these permits and applications and requests for information, but also in identifying sources, corporations who are using more sustainable sources, or advocating within their state, because, like a state government, even if it's not a coastal government, might then decide on having a policy to only source electronics from sustainable sources. So there's a lot of sort of entry points, as well as just informing others around the dinner table about this issue.
Yeah, I would just point out very quickly before we use that word again, because this is sort of like in my deep wheelhouse. There are no sustainable forms of mining except for recycling. So mining is not sustainable. These are not single use
Yeah.
items. We can all recycle our phone out there. So I don't, I'm not targeting you in particular, Laurel, but
Yeah, no.
we often struggle with that word within the mining sector and within the oil and gas sector where I work when I'm doing journalism, because a lot of people say that word, but what they're really meaning is exactly what David has been telling us, which reuse, reduce, and recycle. The 3 R's are so important with these minerals because these minerals are incredibly recyclable. Unlike something like plastic, you yourself out there listening to this now can also be part of local sustainability drives to make sure that your local landfill recycles these critical energy minerals from e-waste. And it is up to you to go and check whether that is a possibility. And if your city doesn't do it, your municipality, you can go to a municipality to recycle your phone where there is a facility that does that. And those are growing, and only public demand will provide that service. So I just wanted to point that out without standing too high up on my soapbox.
No, that's a great point, and I'm curious where batteries fit into that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Laurel. I know that there's a real push, particularly in states and certainly in Europe, to have these lithium batteries in a much more recyclable state. But one of the things that's really revolutionizing the tech sector, and in particular its use of these critical minerals, is a development of systems that don't have to use A, so many of them, and B, minerals that are more like salt than lithium. And yes, listeners will point out that lithium is a type of salt, but that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sodium chloride batteries, just like table salt. So as the world shifts away from these very high value critical minerals, we do need to protect our ocean floors from deep sea mining because, as David has pointed out, it's not fair for us to go and mine the ocean when we could easily make some technological breakthroughs and make, for instance, a salt air battery or a vanadium battery that never gives up its vanadium. So you never have to recycle it. So there are these options out there. And I think, going back to what you were saying, David, it's absolutely important for the public to be part of that process and be educated about this because deep sea mining has so many unknowns to it and our oceans are under such threat. So this is an opportunity for everyone to get involved.
And I'm interested in that one, it hasn't been proven commercially viable yet. So we're at an earlier stage, which also means that, it just might be easier to develop these other technological sources than learn how to mine underneath the deep sea with, no, just that's hard.
So in a previous podcast, we were working with some middle schoolers who developed a deep sea ocean going camera that could be used for all sorts of things. And they said, what did they say, Laurel?
Well,
Everything down there wants to kill you.
yeah.
Think that's probably accurate. And instead of trying to figure out how we can go thousands of feet deep into the dark, salty, cold water and mine it, that, yeah, we should be exploring how to reduce our demand for these minerals. And to your point, Laurel, that this hasn't happened yet, this is the perfect time to stop it because once it starts, there's no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. Right now, they're mostly talking about really deep, really far away places. But once they start seeing the seabed as a commodity that can provide profit, it's going to be everywhere. If you look at maps that show where these deposits might be, because we don't have extensive knowledge of where they actually are, but where they could be, it's a massive part of the ocean. Once we start, there's no stopping it. So it's really important that we get this right.
And there's so much we don't know, you were saying, about the ocean. I mean, not only don't we know about all the critters there, but we also don't know about the relationships and how they use all the different parts of the ocean. And just even where you think sea turtles, well studied, but no, and that's like something that we know about and have studied and put trackers on and all of this. And we still don't know a lot. So
It's incredibly difficult to know all the things we don't know about sea life. And then to think about all the things we don't know about deep sea mining is even more expansive. The deep ocean is really important in our carbon cycling. Our carbon that is heating up our atmosphere, one of the few ways that it exits the carbon cycle is settling into the ocean floor and eventually becoming bedrock. And now we want to scoop all of that up and shoot it into the water column and prevent that sort of carbon cycling. All of that to say, this will have cascading effects, and we do not know the full extent of them yet.
I think one of the most interesting parts of this for anyone who's stuck with us this long and is looking out for some hope, the person who discovered that these polymetallic nodules deep in the ocean's depths that these miners want to target for these critical minerals, the scientist who was actually consulting a company that was doing a test to pull them out of the ocean so that they could figure out what it was going to cost to do a cost benefit analysis and find out how they could take them out successfully. She is actually the researcher who uncovered the fact that these nodules are creating oxygen on Earth for the very first time. So I think it's just fascinating that the company that was itself going to exploit this mineral resource on the ocean floor actually discovered that it's providing oxygen to all things on Earth. And this is how much we don't know. I think it's fascinating and important.
And will the company change its plans because
No,
of
they
its
fired her.
discovery?
They fired her. I don't know if they've still fired her, but that was the story.
Oh,
And
that's depressing.
and in fact, the company itself slated her study and tried to have it removed from publication. And instead, a lot of people piled in and confirmed her research. And it was her very first publication, I believe, of her professional career. And it's really put her on track to become someone who is potentially going to exploit the ocean for profit and make that possible as a scientist to become one of its most vocal protectors and opponents of deep sea mining.
It's crazy what happens when you put science above profit and you look at what is actually happening and what needs to happen for conservation, and it's usually not what profit is incentivizing.
So we have to end on a bit more of a positive note on what,
We do. You're
we
right, Laurel.
because otherwise I'll go away very depressed. And I guess, but what I keep turning to is that this is very early in the process, and all the different entry points that me sitting here could have potentially affecting this. Just talking in terms of sharing this podcast, because there's a lot I learned, I just don't know. And clearly there's a lot we don't know. So just putting that out there, and the idea of, wow, do we want to destroy it before we even know what exists?
Absolutely.
There are a lot of levers still to be pulled. Organizations like mine, and including mine, stand ready to litigate if and when these permits issue. We have a lot of environmental statutes on our side that show that this is wrong. The Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the NEPA. There are so many that we have a lot of tools in our toolkit. We have people on our side that do not want the deep ocean destroyed and to become an open pit mine. And so that matters. We have the ability to pressure corporations into refusing these metals and making this not a profitable endeavor. And then, as Jeff highlighted, we will come up with technological advances that make it unnecessary to do this type of massive mining operation deep in the sea. So if we can just slow them down enough that we can get there, we can keep this from devastating our oceans.
And presumably the technological advances will be very cost effective, especially relative to deep sea mining, which is not yet commercially viable, which has a lot of issues related to it, since the ocean is not a very hospitable place.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I agree. I would also note, on a very positive way to end this, the young lady who was with the team that discovered the fact that these nodules are populating our planet with oxygen for the very first time. All the scientists who actually worked on that at first have now gotten funding from the Nippon Foundation in Japan, and they are leaving this month to go and do a study of how much oxygen these nodules are producing, to create a sound scientific understanding of how valuable they could be to all life on Earth, not just to the pockets of large deep sea mining companies. So that's really exciting, and I wish them well out there on their expedition. They've left, I think, about 3 weeks ago. It's exciting times, and there's so much more to discover.
Thank you, Derrick, so much for giving us some information on this, and just exposing a little bit of what life is like in the deep sea and just in the ocean more generally. I really appreciate the conversation.
Me too.
It was my pleasure.
One question though, David, what is your favorite deep sea ocean life?
Good question.
Is a good question. I would have to say a tube worm, but don't Google it. They're maybe not the cutest, but they're so unique. Actually, wait, can I change my answer completely?
Sure.
You can have two. You can even have two.
There are so many. I actually love these isopods. They're like giant roly-polies that scavenge in the deep sea, and when a whale dies and sinks to the deep sea, they come and scavenge, and a whale fall can last decades down there. And so these are really cool scavengers that just run around the ocean floor as opportunists. And they look like really big roly-polies. They're pretty cute. It's so cool.
And you do have to. Now you made me curious about the worm. So tell me about the tube worms.
Yeah, because these tube worms, as Jeff alluded to earlier, they're living in communities that function in a way that existed before photosynthesis was invented. So there's just this ancient way of using chemicals to create life. Reminds me, like you mentioned, of just the beginning of the ocean, and it's really cool.
Yeah, the beginning of life on Earth. There could be ancestors to all of us, living fossils, dwelling on their little hydrothermal vent that's called a smoker, and they are populated by their friends, the crabs, and they've been living down there for eons. And hopefully they will continue living their happy little tube worm lives. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Dave. This is such a fascinating subject. Thank you so much for joining me, Laurel. And thanks again to David Derrick and the Center for Biological Diversity for this crucial discussion. We want you all to know how happy we are that you joined us today to explore our natural world and how you can help protect it. You can find information about how you can help make a real difference in the show notes below. The easiest way to support this podcast is to share, subscribe, and follow it. Please also share it with your friends, family, and neighbors. Tell them about what you heard and where you heard it. It really works and helps us keep it ad-free. Thanks for listening. Together, we can help sustain this wonder-filled world.